And good evening from Philadelphia. Frank here with a Thursday night edition of UFO News Network Sunday. Something a little different tonight. No guests. It's just Chant and I going through some news happenings that have popped up over the last couple of weeks or so that merit some comment. And we've taken a closer look at some of this material. So let me not waste any time and bring on my co-host. As always, the one, the only, Chant Hannah. How are you doing tonight, Chant?
I'm doing really good, Frank. How are you?
Great, great. Well, we've had an interesting last couple of weeks. I know back in January, I'd predicted that February was going to be an interesting month with some big news, and we're coming up on the last week of the month, and that hasn't happened. and I'm disappointed in all that. But enough news has happened, and unfortunately, it's not of the necessarily really good variety where we're learning a lot more about UFOs. Unfortunately, a lot of this involves how people go about UFOs, and of course, that's quite often not always a pleasant thing. So let's not beat around the bush. Let's get right to our first topic of the evening. Let's get to something that happened the weekend before last out in West Virginia. And this relates to the infamous Wilson notes. What happened was Hal Puthoff was making a public presentation, and following his presentation, there was an open question and answer session. And he got a question. He got a couple of interesting questions. One from a fellow named Jonathan Hunt, another who is a friend of the show here, Tom Whitmore. They both got a couple of interesting questions in. And Jonathan Hunt got the question in about the Wilson documents. And basically, Puthoff's response was, that is a question about the Wilson documents. They probably got leaked on the internet, and Wilson was one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff interviewed by my senior scientist colleague Eric Davis. Since it discusses potentially ongoing ongoing programs, I have no comment. So that's basically where everything started off. Needless to say, people who believe that these Wilson documents are authentic obviously crowed that what Puthoff did is that basically he confirmed that in fact those Wilson documents are in fact legitimate. Looking at the specifics of what he said, all I got out of it was that he seemed to be confirming that what Puthoff did was confirm that there was some kind of contact, some kind of an interview between Davis and Wilson, and that's as far as it goes. The details of those docs are unconfirmed, but at least it seemed to me anyway, and to a lot of other people, that at least he confirmed that there was an interview between Davis and Wilson. And just to backtrack a little bit, this all stems from a meeting that took place between Stephen Greer, the moonwalker Edgar Mitchell, and Admiral Wilson when he was working in the intelligence field for the Defense Department. And basically the follow-up, according to Greer and Mitchell, was that Wilson tried to find out more about these special access programs and about is the ET presence being covered up? Do they have special knowledge? And that the story was way back when, when Wilson followed up on it, that he got basically a door slammed in his face by this unnamed defense contractor. He ran into trouble as far as being broken down in rank, and Greer went public about this, specifically naming Wilson. Mitchell mentioned the incident, but didn't name Mitchell specifically, and it caused quite a big hubbub. But that sort of went away until these Wilson-Davis notes became available freely on the internet, and we've all had a hack at them, including us, and we've been able to, I think, poke some major holes in the veracity of these documents. So enough backstory. Let's go a little bit and talk about someone who, or the individual who put together this particular program for Hal Puthoff to speak at. And that would be a man named John L. Peterson, who runs the Arlington Institute, basically a Washington metropolitan area think tank. And he put this together. Now, John L. Peterson's an interesting guy. because he obviously is able to book Hal Puthoff for a public speech, but also he was a member of Robert Bigelow's National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, Science Advisory Board, when that organization was still operational. So he's been a player with these guys for quite some time, and also. It's the very same John L. Peterson that was involved in the Greer meeting with James Woolsey, another meeting that Greer had back in the 90s that no one denies happened, but there has been obviously some discrepancies among the parties in terms of what actually happened at that meeting. Peterson signs off and says basically that, they were just humoring Greer and they weren't particularly interested. He was rambling on about UFOs, but, we just humored the guy. Now, I've heard that, we've had Joseph Burks here on the show. He said that he was involved in setting this up as well as Peterson, and that the truth actually leans a little bit closer to Greer, that they did express a little bit more interest. And this particular incident is one that it keeps my mind open into the possibility that something did happen after this initial Wilson-Greer meeting back in the 90s, also involving Edgar Mitchell, Willard Miller, as we've talked to him about all this, and some others as well. So I'm pretty open-minded that something happened as a result of this Wilson-Greer meeting, just that these documents should not be taken at face value. Okay, and what they certainly shouldn't be done is be described as the leak of the century, when there's really there's no evidence to suggest that these notes are legitimate. There really isn't any. Now,
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, jump on in, Chant. What have you got?
Well, I was just going to say something that I always tell people, and that is that not a single person to date has brought forth a single shred of forensic evidence or analysis or proof that would withstand the rigorous standards required in the spirit of science to prove these conspiracies as being real. I say conspiracies plural because I also include the Bigelow memo in that. But yes, of course, Wilson-Davis leak is absolutely a conspiracy. And regardless of what Puthoff said, it does not authenticate that alleged document as it stands in its entirety.
No, in no way, shape, or form. And even Puthoff's statement, if you give it, you sort of run with it and accept the fact that he's confirming that Davis did, in fact, speak directly to Wilson. It doesn't say anything beyond that. Does it confirm that they met in a parking lot at the EG&G building in Las Vegas? No. Does it confirm that Wilson was in Las Vegas on that date? I believe it was in October 2004. I don't have the notes in front of me. No. They've not placed Wilson in town on that particular date. And for those documents to be legitimate, you've got to do that. You've got to do that, and they failed to do that. Now, we were ready to go with it, go with this story pretty much as is from a couple days back, but yesterday, Richard Mr. Leak of the Century Dolan followed up with Puthoff and asked Puthoff for his comment about his earlier comment. And essentially what Puthoff said was he didn't confirm anything regarding any kind of contact between Davis and Wilson. All he was basically doing is sort of repeating the question as he got it. And his only comment of any importance was because it involves potentially ongoing programs, I have no comment. And of course, Dolan's initial reaction was, his immediate reaction was, he didn't believe Puthoff. So, it's very convenient how you don't believe someone when they say something that doesn't fit into the story that you want to tell.
Which makes it an agenda.
There you go. That's exactly what it makes it, isn't it?
At this point, these conspiracies that surfaced last year, being the Bigelow memo and the Wilson-Davis doc, or docs rather, and I say docs in quotes because they're not really docs, okay? But it's at this point, it's a matter of faith that we have to take them as being real, and that is not good enough. Yeah, we have to have more data to corroborate forensically that these are real, not a provenance of cloak and dagger stories. that shouted at the top of mountains in order to make us believe something. I don't believe something like a document in a faith-based manner. I have to separate fact from fantasy. And so the only way to do that is to do research on them, which we did rigorously for months, and came to the conclusion with you that there's no authenticity to them whatsoever as they stand in their entirety.
Yeah, I mean, is it possible? But is it possible that some of this material might prove out that Davis did have contact with Wilson, and even taking it a step further, that some of the things that Wilson is purported to have told Davis in the doc might prove out? Yeah, it's possible, but nobody's digging in, nobody's demonstrating that really any of it is anything other than a fiction. The only thing we know for sure is that, in fact, Greer and Edgar Mitchell did go in. They did meet with Wilson. Will Miller was there. That's really about all we know for sure. And obviously, we've got the on the record denials from Wilson to Billy Cox way back in the day, and also we received obviously denials from Commander Miller. I got to be honest. Looking at that John Peterson letter, is it possible? Do I necessarily believe Will Miller's denials that anything happened after the fact? No, I don't. But what I do believe is Commander Miller's comments about how that letter to Eric Davis was manipulated. Yeah, that part I believe. As far as the questions he purportedly asked Admiral Wilson to ask these contractors about these old cases. Do I believe that he didn't ask those questions, that he doesn't care about those cases, in particular the Socorro case? Yeah, I believe him when he says that. So I think we have proven, really, that this document, there's Admiral Wilson notes, and also the Bigelow, Kit Green alien autopsy email chain memo, whatever you want to call it, that they have both been seriously manipulated. And as a result of all that, you have really got to dig in and pin down things as well as you possibly can, before you accept these as legitimate documents. And I mean, that's about where it is right now. I mean, I can't imagine if somebody calls himself an historian. I think, well, would Douglas Brinkley be doing something like that if similar documents were found about I don't know, Richard Nixon, or Dwight Eisenhower or Winston Churchill, whatever the case may be? Do you think Doris Kearns Goodwin would be doing something like this, saying, this is the smoking gun, we've proven that Lincoln did this or that or the other thing, or David McCullough? Do you think those are historians? Do you think those people will be running around calling a document like this, with its lack of providence and so many holes poked in it? You think they'd be calling this the leak of the century? I don't think they would.
Right, and that's also why they call ufology the Wild Wild West, because they accept anything as the smoking gun and the cherry on top of the sundae regarding something being called proof or evidence. And a lot of people just make this shit up as they go along. This is the thing. There is no clincher to any of these alleged docs that makes them any more authentic than they're not. So there's really nothing authentic about them to me. There's no evidence to support any claims being made about these alleged docs. Facts cannot be refuted. Claims can. And until somebody comes up with something that is irrefutable, these conspiracies will always remain in the unverified file for me and for many, many others who are needing the kind of evidence and proof that withstands the test of time regarding these alleged docs.
Yeah, and I hold out the possibility that there might be some legitimacy to them, but they've been manipulated. It's going to be very difficult to dig in. Now we know the government has been involved and knows something and has done work on UFOs back to 1947, right up until today. I mean, we're seeing that in the news today. So during this time frame, this late 90s into the early 2000s time frame, something was going on. There's no question about it. And we don't really have a good idea what that is. And there's always a possibility that these documents may provide a lead. Some interesting names were dropped in there, like General Mike Kostelnik's. Who I understand went off and took the revolving door out of the military and went over and started working for one of the major defense contractors. We don't know, but more work needs to be done before that you claim that these documents are legitimate documents that you can sort of take to the bank. It might provide some good leads. It may very well provide some good leads, but beyond that, don't believe everything you read on the internet. So there you go. And that's all I got on that, Chant. You got anything? Or we off to the next topic?
I just think that the UFO community deserves better. And what I mean by that is, instead of shoving conspiracy-laden stories at us with these cloak and dagger backgrounds that, are really great for the movies, but in reality really don't stand the test of time regarding scrutiny and research, and when doing their due diligence as far as fact-checking these conspiracies, it damages the UFO community. It's like all these black eyes that they have to deal with. The UFO community has so much speculation. It's rife with speculation and fairy tales, and this is one reason why people have an issue with the UFO community. Not all the time, but when things like this surface, where they're dropped like grenades on Reddit, and then people just take them at face value, it can really damage the UFO community. And as you can see, people still believe to this day, they just believe them at face value without ever questioning them one time. I think the thing that I'm really tired of are people just assuming something is right and falling down the rabbit hole without ever bothering one time to lift their finger to do some research on stuff like this.
There you go. Okay, and now we're ready to move on to topic number 2. Now on to our next subject, the TTSA-Serpo hoax connection. Now, our friend Deep Prasad was spelunking down the Serpo.org website recently, and he turned up some material that connects what has been sitting out for years on the Serpo website with things that TTSA has either been saying or naming their own projects after. He took his finds, he posted them over on Reddit, and basically his analysis was sort of at the bottom of his post. Of course, he linked and documented everything that he put out there earlier on. But basically, I'm going to start with his conclusions, basically overlap on the current pattern arising from all of this. I think it leaves us with 2 possibilities, but there are likely more. Number 1, TTSA has a real-life version of Serpo being played out. Number 2, TTSA has access to the Roswell craft to know exactly what the LMH part and other samples do. So basically, his finds came in 2 essential parts, I would say. The first one relates to the bismuth magnesium fragment that they've been talking about studying for some time. Again, Hal Puthoff has been running around saying quite a bit about how this is a curious sample, and going into a lot of very technical talk about waveguides and so on and so forth. Now, he's been doing this for some time, so it's not necessarily shocking that this particular material would end up over on Serpo. I think most observers generally agree that a lot of this material emanates from Rick Doty. One of the question that our friend Tom Whitmore asked Puthoff at this meeting the other weekend in West Virginia was, can you confirm anything about Rick Doty's working for you? Puthoff did, said he thought Doty was a nice guy. So that Doty got hold of this material a number of years ago is not necessarily shocking. Okay, now jumping back and talking about Deep's conclusions, needless to say, the TTSA fanboys really jumped all over Deep, and I think unfairly so. You can disagree with his conclusions, but what they failed to recognize, failed to give him credit for, most importantly, is that he found these connections. Now, the second connection, I think, is much more troublesome for TTSA, and frankly, we've sought comment from them about this and have not gotten any kind of response, not surprisingly. But what we have here is mentioning under new technologies being developed at this Nevada test site, Project Atom, a project that uses radiation, nuclear energy against alien material to determine how the alien material can absorb and repel radiation. Basically, materials type research under the name Project Atom. Well, anybody who's been following TTSA carefully knows that they launched last year with a big hubbub and a nice little commercial with lots of dramatic music and quick cuts showing them picking up these different alien samples. And of course, what did they name it? They named it the Atom Project. Now, this is a little bit cheeky, in my view, and just a little too cool for school here. I think that's all we're seeing. I think all they did was they just were, they wanted to play a little inside joke. Nobody will ever pick up this connection, and that's all they did here. They just got a little bit too cheeky. But this is a terrible blunder. We went into the Wayback Machine, and we were able to see that this particular page, this particular section of this page, was posted well before TTSA was founded, and certainly well before this Atom Project that they put together was named. So I don't believe this is any kind of a coincidence. This was done deliberately, and I think very, very unwisely. And there are a number of mistakes that I think TTSA has made, that either deliberately or not so deliberately, and I think there is some deliberateness to it. That they're just really making some pretty horrible mistakes in terms of. For example, the Chris Mellon, the Chris Mellon presentation when they opened TTSA, showing the photograph of the number one Mylar balloon that was connected to the Tic Tac incident, and presenting it almost as though it was an actual photograph. The Tom DeLonge showing the obviously CGI video of a UFO when he was on the Joe Rogan show, and there's a lot of odd things going on, and a lot of reasons why people should really have their antenna up. Not just TTSA material necessarily, but other stuff as well. You've also got. Let me add these pictures. Going back to the very initial days, the very first days that the TTSA announced it. I'm not saying that these particular incidents had anything to do directly with TTSA, but. Right after that New York Times story came out, you had Julian Assange tweeting, the New York Times fake news apocalypse has reached perfection, with a front page story claiming UFOs exist. No surprise to see CIA, parapsychology, Scientology frauds like Harold E. Puthoff involved in the most basic journalistic questions unasked. So those comments seem to parrot a lot of what Ron Pandolfi was saying in the time between the TTSA kickoff and the New York Times story. Okay, then you had, and let me add these pictures. I had them unfortunately in the wrong folder, so let me do this and add these pictures as well. A lot of strange things just seem to continually happen regarding TTSA, and other folks were sort of in the field. Now let's see here. Okay. Let me go here, and this is my bad, folks. There we go. Having some technical difficulties here. Yeah, go ahead, Chant. If you want to jump in and help me out here, I can.
Sure. I'll just go ahead
Yeah,
and
help
read
me out.
part of Deep's conclusion. I'm going to go ahead and read it. Says one, TTSA is a real-life version of Project Serpo being played out. We are all being had, and they represent phase 2 of a very complex hoax orchestrated by physicists and intel folks with nothing better to do with some nefarious intent pertaining to perception management of entire populations and cultures. 2, TTSA has access to the Roswell craft and know exactly what the LMH part and other samples do, and will prove it one day by connecting the dots together out in the open. Both possibilities are equally disturbing, in my opinion, because we're being taken along for a ride either way. And just want to let everybody know regarding a technical thing, LMH stands for Linda Moulton Howe. I reached out to Bill Ryan on this topic because Bill Ryan was the individual who actually created the projectserpo.org site. And I asked him what did he think about this opinion that Deep has. And he went over everything that Deep wrote very carefully, and he felt in part that he grabbed onto a tiny part of this big picture and is making a big deal out of all the wrong issues. That was a quote by Bill. And I do have to get his permission to be able to say a few other things that he had to say about that, which I will actually say in another podcast if he gives permission. This is where Frank and I actually disagree. I don't find anything of import regarding what Deep said at all regarding the conclusion I just read. I did want to mention, let's just say in theory, for example, that Tom DeLonge, in a wide-eyed state of mind, actually absorbed the Project Serpo conspiracy as true as it stands, or was affected or impressed by it in some one way or another, and he decided to go ahead and, in a sentimental manner, name a few projects or tell folks to name a few projects in TTSA, the same manner as Project Serpo, or parallel or mirror some of the activities of Project Serpo or data. That to me does not mean anything at all, because you can take any kind of data from any subject and correlate it with another topic if you really wanted to, especially with the name Delta, which is, I think, what a Greek letter, and that is used often in military nomenclature. It's also used often regarding many other topics out there. Delta is very often used freely, hundreds of thousands of times. So is Adam, a biblical reference, also an iconic name. You can find that anywhere with many, many topics. So I actually completely disagree with Frank on this, but please do go.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I had to move. I had a couple of images in the wrong file. But going back initially in that time frame, the very early days, you also saw some of these dirds that have been released. And you saw literally the next day, at Corey Goode's website, he posts one of these dirds related to... one of the dirds, one of the ones written by Eric Davis. I think it was related to wormholes, as I recall correctly. I've got the image cut off. But anyway, how does Corey Goode get hold of this the day after the New York Times article comes out? Somebody's got hold of this stuff, and they're playing games. They're giving it to somebody like Corey Goode, who talks about what he talks. I don't even pay that much attention to what he says, but he's really a fantasist. He's not brought anything to the table, yet he gets this handed to him. That's something that's very, very weird. And again, I do think that there's something to this, to TTSA naming their materials effort the Atom Project. I do think that there's something that it's not a coincidence that again they're being a little too cheeky. I don't disagree with, or excuse me, I don't agree with Deep's conclusions, but but the fact that he came up with this find, I mean, I wish I'd found it. I wish I had seen it, and we would have talked about it here, probably in about the same detail. But my conclusion is they're just being a little too cheeky. There's a little game playing going on. TTSA is involved in it to some extent. Some other people are involved in it to an extent as well. And let's go to that. Like, there's the image of Chris Mellon along with the #1 Mylar balloon from the fighter sweep story about the Nimitz case, and then of course where we got the other image here. I think we've got that. Oh, well, we don't have the Joe Rogan image, but very famously, DeLong was on that particular show as well, and it was showing Joe Rogan, obviously a CGI animation, and claiming it's real. And they're not doing themselves any favors when they play these sorts of games. They're not helping themselves at all. They've done a lot of good work in the field, and I've said many times on this show wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the things that they're doing. Is it going to do really huge harm? Is Tucker Carlson going to look into this and say, what the heck's going on here? No, he's going to have UFO guests on maybe once every couple months. They'll talk for 5 minutes, and the gist of it will be, UFOs are real? Wow, this should be a bigger story. So, but amongst the folks that follow this sort of thing carefully, this sort of thing, it needs to be cleaned up. It absolutely needs to be cleaned up. Not all of it is TTSA. Remember, during the 5th episode of their show, they spent an entire segment sort of trashing Rick Doty, and but they ought to follow their own advice a little bit more carefully and clean things up, because this was a mistake that was made a little over a year ago with this naming of the Atom Project, and it just wasn't discovered until recently by Deep Prasad. And Deep deserves a lot of credit for going forward with it. Again, the criticism was really directed too much towards his analysis of what he found and not enough on what he found, because what he found is, like I said, really quite significant. Project Atom. Of course, no coincidence there. Yeah, Atom and Delta and all those sorts of names, yeah, they're used pretty regularly. But here, when you see it's related to alien material, same thing. No, it's not a coincidence, and I think it's a big mistake for them to have done that sort of thing.
If I were to go into some top secret files or maybe even unclassified files, non-classified files of the U.S. governments or any other government for that matter that have projects on a regular, I would probably find a Project Delta and a Project Atom.
Right.
But
right.
That I'm just saying that
Understood.
I think that the possibility of that is going to be there. Now, the last thing is, I know I probably said this, but I really don't see everything that Deep went over in that opinion that he wrote equals that TTSA is an evil organization or it's a nefarious organization.
No.
I think that that's weighing too heavily on a narrow topic and giving TTSA too much credit regarding a very, very tiny topic. It's not necessarily tiny. It's just a very narrow topic. Wanted to let folks know a little bit about TTSA. It's an entertainment company, which is also, it's a public benefits corporation and franchise. But I'm going to read something from TTSA. Here's a quote from TTSA. Examples of our approach to a vertically integrated aerospace science and entertainment consortium are our award-winning franchises, Secret Machines and Poet Anderson, that are #1 new releases in their categories on Amazon.com. Secret Machines, well-documented events behind unidentified aerial phenomena, with input from top government officials and scientists. Machines is an example of how real research can generate media content. And it goes on to say more. And that is, whenever possible, here, I'll go ahead and give a quote. TTSA aims to push the boundaries of what standard academia, corporate, and government labs typically support. But we don't believe discovery that impacts humankind should be solo a solo venture. The company will provide positive support for government, aerospace industry, and academia in the accomplishment of our goals. Wherever possible, we will translate what we know into an entertainment medium that we can responsibly share not only with our customers, but our community, both through our community of interest and through our entertainment media. That's why we decided to be a public benefit corporation. Now, as you can see, they're sort of trying to have their cake and eat it too. In what respect? They want to be considered an organization that is seriously researching the topic of UAPs, but they also want to be considered an entertainment corporation, also an entertainment company. So I just want to make it real clear to folks that if you're expecting a lot from an entertainment company, understand that's what they are. That's what they say in the IRS. If you look up their financial information that's listed on the IRS website, it says all that right there.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because what I think is going on here is you've got a lot of spooks and a lot of intel people, including folks who work for TTSA, who are sort of looking to entertain themselves. And with these little inside jokes like the Adam Project, and getting Julian Assange to tweet criticism of them, and leaking scientific papers to Corey Goode of all people. What you're seeing is a lot of people, just insiders, sort of playing games and tweaking each other. I think there was a little bit of that going on in the Wilson notes as well. Some little tweaks and some little digs at different people, sort of trolling each other. Again, I'm not suggesting that TTSA is involved in every one of these, but what I am suggesting is there's a lot of that going on, and as a result of that people really should have their antenna up. They really should be extra skeptical of everything we see and hear. So that's my point, and I'm done with this topic. You have anything else you want to add before we wrap this one up?
I think skepticism is key, but creating a whole new conspiracy out of something is probably not a good idea. I had a lot of problems with this opinion that was written. I did reach out to Deep and asked him if he wanted to comment on it. He did not. However, I will be covering it more in the future, because there's more research that I'm doing on this topic. And did want to mention that I did reach out to the person who created this website, and he did a quick check himself. I did the same check also, but I wanted him to duplicate my efforts and find out on his side, Bill Ryan that is, whether it looked like projectserpo.org had any new data added to it, or it had been edited in any way, shape, or form around the time TTSA was created. And even though I felt intuitively probably had not been, we were both right, because we checked. And for example, like the first archive of Serpo release number 25, which was in January 2008, against the current page on the net, it's 100% identical, is what Bill told me.
Right.
And he checked word count, which was 1,417 words. The characters, no spaces, was 7,524. The characters with spaces were, I think, 9,197. And Bill Ryan did confirm nothing was ever changed. And, it's just important for people to know that, we're checking everything on this to make sure that we do our due diligence on this topic.
Yep, and like I say, the overarching message I've got tonight is, raise your level of skepticism. Really just don't accept anything at face value. So we're done with this one, and it's off to topic 3. Now on to issue 3. What we had last week was an article in Popular Mechanics by Tim McMillan that cleared up a little bit about whether or not Lou Elizondo worked for TTSA and all that. Now, Tim McMillan, just to give a little background, is sort of a protege of John Greenewald. So for a year plus, both those guys have been running around every time Greenewald would get some sort of comment from the Defense Department saying that or providing some sort of discrepancy in terms of what TTSA was saying about what Elizondo did and what they themselves, the To the Stars Academy, was saying about what they did. They would crow about it. Oh, look, we've destroyed TTSA. We've damaged them. We've got nukes. We've destroyed them. Their character is shot, and so on. Yet all of a sudden, now we're seeing Tim McMillan, and I asked him about this. Now Tim McMillan seems to be all on board that everything that Elizondo is saying is the truth. I see no reason to believe that it isn't. The material that Greenewald came up with, to me, was not especially compelling. Just discrepancies, the normal sort of discrepancies that happen, especially when you're dealing with a giant bureaucracy like the Defense Department. But the key thing that McMillan was able to turn up was apparently he was able to get a look at a very thick 450-page document, which was basically the report from Bass, from Bigelow's organization, the subcontractor on the project, their 10-month report on what they'd been doing. Basically, and I guess sent off to the Pentagon and read by assumably Lou Elizondo. But what we saw in that report, McMillan was able to provide a couple snippets from it, and they were interesting and telling. It wasn't a whole lot of material, but basically what we saw was we've seen an additional dirt, an additional scientific paper provided by Kit Green regarding damage done to UFO witnesses by close encounters with UFOs, which really didn't cover any actual research, but it was basically a compilation of fairly well-known cases where people did suffer exposure to radiation and what kind of damage that causes, and a couple of passing references to the very famous Cash Landrum case. That's all. That's about all that report included. Nothing really compelling. Research of a sort of a compilation nature. Nothing really new there. And also, what they also included, or what also McMillan was able to find, it looks like he was able to get photographs of a bar graph at one point, and also looks like a little bit of a report written up that quotes a book called Clear Intent, written by Barry Greenwood and Lawrence Fawcett a number of years ago, a book that primarily focused on a series of cases that took place along the northern U.S. border at different Air Force bases, Malmstrom Air Force Base, Minot, Wurtsmith, and Loring Air Force Base, all of them excellent cases. But apparently, and we've heard this from Lou Elizondo throughout the last couple of years, he doesn't seem to pay any attention to UFO researchers, that realistically he wants a clean slate going in. But apparently it's okay to pay attention to UFO researchers so long as that information is filtered through a defense contractor that is being paid millions of dollars. So, I mean, basically for $20 you can buy a copy of Clear Intent and just read it, but I guess it's this is the way government operates. It's just a lot more cost effective to spend millions of dollars to have somebody for a subcontractor read Clear Intent and write a report about it. So, you know, that's basically what he's got. And what's really interesting to me is this Bigelow funding of by the government during this time frame from 2008, or no, I'm sorry, 2007 to 2012. So from 2007 to 2012, what have we got in terms of cases? Okay, they've released a lot of information, and we're very thankful that they did, because it's been fantastic regarding the 2004 Nimitz case. They've also interviewed a couple pilots relating to a 2015 Roosevelt case, pilots Graves and a coin. That's fantastic stuff. However, did they actually go out and investigate any cases hands-on? Did they send boots on the ground and investigate any cases during the time frame that Bigelow was actually getting the funding? Well, we know of one, and that's because I asked about it. And I was able to ask George Knapp sometime back, a little bit more than a year ago, when he had a little bit of an AMA over at the Coast to Coast website. So I asked him, hey, did ATIP investigate the Stephenville case? Now, that's a case that I'm a really big fan of. We had Steve Hudgens on here a little bit more than a week ago and had a lot of questions for him, told us all about it. A great case that I think deserves a lot more attention. And when these guys, whether it's Knapp or Elizondo or DeLong or whatever the case may be, they should be getting asked about these cases. This is a radar visual case. This is a great case. Exactly like the cases, the Malmstrom, Minot, Wurtsmith, and Loring cases, radar visual cases. Radar is physical evidence. I'm going to make that point again. I'm going to beat that dead horse. Radar is physical evidence. Well, anyway, this is the, in writing, this is the response that I got from George Knapp. The answer is yes. So, yes, they did investigate the Stephenville case. However, that part, however, the part that is fuzzy is whether it was ATIP or OSAP. The program had two names. OSAP was the first name, and it mostly referred to the private contractor Bass. I do not have a security clearance, so I'm not supposed to know some of this stuff, but can say with some level of confidence that the Stephenville case did garner some attention. I can't say for sure whether that was the folks in the Pentagon who looked at it or the private contractors, but they did exchange info on a fairly regular basis from what I understand. So basically what we've got is we're getting a little bit more information. I know that McMillan was criticized a little bit. To me, you can't shoot the messenger. He got what he got. We know a little bit more about how they operated. Not a whole lot, and it might not be a fair and complete picture, but the picture that we're seeing is that, except for the Stephenville case, what they did was a lot of compilational research, some scientific papers based primarily not on original research, but on compiling research that had already been done by other people, and of course, whether that regards science or UFOs. That seems to be the situation, until we hear otherwise. That's all we know. We'd like to know more, obviously. We're pushing to know more. There had to have been some legitimate good cases that came out during that time frame, aside from Stephenville, that happened regarding the military, some base somewhere in the world. They're all over the place, obviously, but we're not hearing about them. And this far along, it's been almost 2.5 years now since TTSA opened the door. And we basically heard about 2 cases from them directly. Great cases though they may be, there have got to be more. And of course, because of my question asking, Knapp confirmed with some level of confidence that the Stephenville case did garner some attention. So that's basically it. 3 cases during this, this entire stretch from 2004 to 2015, an 11-year span. 3 cases. That's what we know about. And yet, at the same time, we've had Elizondo and Chris Millen both saying that a serious issue regarding the UFOs is that the cases are increasing with frequency. Well, what are some of those other cases? Let's hear about those. We have a right to know. It's such a big issue. You want to gather public support to put pressure on Congress to investigate UFOs further. Well, how are we going to do it with the kind of information that we have at hand? So let me catch my breath, and if you want to jump in here and say something, Hannah, by all means, go right ahead.
No, I actually don't have any comments on this. I might in another podcast, but
okay.
Right now I have a lot of topics I want to cover that are current and trending topics in ufology, and this may be one of them, but just not right now.
Okay. So, and again, that's where we're at right now. Cases are increasing with frequency. And I'll make this other point, too, because I think this is an important point to make. I think most of the people who follow the UFO field fairly carefully are convinced that some of these UFO cases are, in fact, extraterrestrial visitors. So, if you accept that, and I do, and I don't know if you do or not, Chant, but I certainly do, then the key question then becomes, how often is it happening? And when you look at these cases, UFO cases, they come in by the thousands, and we've had investigators on here, and most of them can be explained. Some of them a little bit more easily than others, but most of them can. Yet still, there are those troublesome cases, and a particular class of case, a particular type of case, these radar visual cases, where you've got physical evidence in the form of radar capturing these UFOs, and they're getting sighted as well. Those are cases that merit being set aside. They merit being set into a special classification of cases, and I think that when you put all those cases together, and I'm not saying every radar every radar visual case is going to be ET, but if you're looking for cases that are in fact ET, that's where it's going to be most likely to. That's where they're going to be most likely to be found. So that's about all I've got to say on that subject, Chant, and let's go on to our next topic, if you will. Are you ready for that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Okay, now on to our next issue. Now, a few weeks back, an article came out touting an enormous, an earth-shattering event that the Vatican was going to host a UFO conference. This got a lot of play. People were, again, taking this silly story at face value. There was some truth at it, at the core of it. There was some accuracy to it. However, the story was grossly exaggerated, and we sort of dug in on this a little bit. So, Chant, you want to take it away and explain a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah. So, on this Nimbus website, they had an article that was published on January 16th of this year, and the title proclaims the Vatican prepares a conference on extraterrestrial life, which is rather misleading, I believe, because after having done research on this, I found out that there might be a conference being held in Vatican City, but not at the actual Vatican itself. Now, I did reach out to two well-known, and when I say well-known, these people are legendary in the field of ufology. I cannot mention the other person, but that person did say, this is absolutely not true. If it were true that the word astrobiology would have been included in this UFO conference, or this conference on extraterrestrial life, rather, to be held at the Vatican. And the other individual that I contacted was Alex Giannetti, and he actually contacted an individual who is the founder of CUNE, which is the organization that is responsible for being part of this conference regarding extraterrestrial life at the Vatican, and allegedly. And I'm going to go ahead and read what Alex said. He said, "Hi guys, the source is Snake Dose, UFO Spain, a sensationalist site from Spain of dubious reputation on its announcements and veracity. Also, they have an English version. I just talked with Dr. Pinotti. He doesn't know anything, nothing about this." That was in parentheses, by the way. And then Alex goes on to say, who was founder of the CUN, C-U-N. That was also director before and after Miro Bigliotti, mentioned as responsible for the unconfirmed event in February. The Vatican have been having during the last years many events on astronomy and exobiology. And in 2015, Kuhn was lecturing about UFOs. Also, article is totally wrong in associating this pioneering organization to the Stars Academy. In October 2018, Bigliotti invited DeLong and Elizondo to a national event in Rome, as the Academy was interested in starting an exchange of information with official delegations in Europe and around the world, although their interest is to find evidence to sustain their pedestrian philosophy epistemology that UFOs are a matter of defense and security. This also was agreed by the director board of CUNE then, with the exception of one member related to intelligence. The Italians, included the Vatican, always have been had a positive and non-harming open position with and toward extraterrestrial life and its past and present UFO phenomena, sightings, and related manifestations. And he also went on to say he's checking with the Vatican anyway and hopes to have an official response soon on this. But Alex's basic point was that even Dr. Pinotti, who is the founder of the organization mentioned in this article that will be involved in this alleged extraterrestrial conference, at the Vatican had no idea about this, and it doesn't sound like there's much authenticity to this claim. The other thing I wanted to mention is the Vatican has considered the possibility of aliens, and wanted to mention in November 11th of 2009, there was an article on CBSNews.com regarding that, and there was some kind of conference, and there were folks of science-related and religious backgrounds that attended this actual conference. So my point here is when there's an actual conference related to this astrobiology topic, mainstream media usually covers it. Well, I went ahead and checked also with the Vatican's website, the papal calendar, and after translating everything just like Frank did, because he did his own source checking too, there is absolutely nothing to indicate that there is or was a conference there this month or any month so far this year regarding extraterrestrial life or UFO activity of any kind. And it's really important to note that if the Vatican is going to have a conference like that, that is what the papal calendar is for, is to list things of that nature or of any nature regarding any kind of session or conference or activity they're going to be having. So that's the end of it. And I do know that a lot of people in the UFO field were really excited about this, and they really wanted this to be, a real thing.
True.
I mean, we saw there was a big there were folks falling all over themselves trying to prove this was true. But if it's not on the Vatican's official website, and also then it didn't happen, okay? And
right.
the last thing I wanted to mention is I did do some source checking after the event was alleged to have happened at the Vatican, which was on February 12th, and still nothing. There's nothing there to show that it actually occurred.
Now, nothing ever did happen, because in point of fact, what this dodgy website reported was grossly exaggerated based on fact. What actually happened was there is a parish, the Pontifical Parish St. Anna of the Vatican, and what they do is on Wednesday nights, every Wednesday night, they have a regular speaking program, and they'll have different speakers come in. For example, January 22nd, the 50th year of the Vatican Radio, for example, and looks like someone came in and spoke about that. They also had, a speaker come in and talk about kidney diseases. Okay, so what happened on February 12th was they did have a speaker at this parish that is located within Vatican City. They had one speaker come in, Vladimiro Bibilotti, who is associated with CUN, the Centro Ufological Nacional. Basically, it was the organization that Elizondo and DeLong spoke at, and then you saw some of their behind-the-scenes exchanges on video during the final episode of the Unidentified program. So that is that organization. Bibilotti is from that organization, and he did speak at this this parish that's in Vatican City on the subject of the universe and possible meetings with other civilizations. And there's basically the bill. That's the lineup for all the different speakers that looks like this parish has lined up through the first quarter. And there you can see Bibilotti in February. He is listed, let's see, it was the 12th. So he's the second one down in Februaro. My Italian is not as good as it once was back when, from the days that I was growing up in North Jersey, when my Italian was in fact quite excellent. But but those days are gone. So basically, this is a local church that has a regular speakers program. They had a researcher from CUN come in to talk about possible alien encounters, and that is basically the gist of what they actually did. And this particular story got blown up and exaggerated wildly, and somehow got turned into a Vatican conference.
Right.
And so
it sensationalized something. No.
So
it's not.
yeah. So again, there's a little bit of truth at the core of this, but again, this entire show has basically been to sort of bore down a little bit on so much exaggeration and nonsense that is floating around in the field that we may look back on this particular show at future dates and call it our nonsense show. I think that might be because
Right.
that's basically what we did. We've cut
Yeah.
down we've cut into a lot of the nonsense that's been floating around for the last couple of weeks. The reason for it, well, I mean, things have been slow since basically last summer. Nothing really wildly compelling. There was a new article by Chris Mellon that was posted on
Yes.
the American Legion website today.
It was a great article.
Yeah. And possibly they are, they're gearing up, and we'll see more. We've been having some private conversations where, it looks like maybe some additional cases are going to be discussed during their second run of shows, and they will come to light. So hopefully that is the case. But the way things are right now, frankly, we're in a position where the best thing to do is to knock down a lot of the nonsense, basically, and a lot of the wishful thinking that's going on. And so far, we've done that, and we've got another segment to get to. So unless you have something to wrap this particular segment up with, Chant, I'm ready to go on to our next
just one
segment.
last thing.
Yeah.
One last thing I wanted to mention is if you go on
You're breaking up a little bit. You're breaking up a little bit. So you might want to start.
Okay.
Your last point. Start from the top, if you don't mind.
I did actually reach out to the Vatican to ask them about this. I did also reach out to CUNA organization to find out more information. So it's just I'm letting my listeners know that I've been doing my due diligence on this to reach out to various folks and organizations to find out more about it. But lastly, did want to mention that if you go on the Vatican's official papal calendar website, you will see on February 12th, it says, Querida Amazonia, post-synodal apostolic exhortation to the people of God and to all people of goodwill, 12 p.m. on February 12th. Yeah. That is all the Vatican had. They did not have anything else.
Yeah, and it's not surprising that the people that you reached out to didn't really know about the speaking engagement, because it's a speaking engagement as part of a local church function. It's nice that they did that. It's cool that they did that, but they're not going to know all about it. They're not going to be up on that.
I can't necessarily say they don't know about it. I can just say I did do my due diligence and reach out to them, but I did not get a response. And lastly, just want to remind listeners to go ahead and look up something very interesting, and that is something a lot of people know, but some people do not, and that's the Vatican Observatory owns a telescope in Arizona. And as Rome expanded, light pollution from the city made it increasingly difficult for astronomers at Vatican Observatory, located 15 miles from the city at the papal summer residence in Castel Gandolfo, to view the night skies. So in 1981, the observatory opened a second research center in Tucson, Arizona, and the Vatican conducts astronomical research with a state-of-the-art telescope that sits atop Mount Graham in southeast Arizona.
All righty, then on to our next topic. And finally tonight, we're going to deal with an article that was posted over at Vice. Vice is a mainstream news entity. They've got a TV show on, I believe is it on HBO? Could be on HBO. And they've also got a website. So it's small. I mean, it's not NBC or CBS, but they're a niche, I would say, mainstream news organization. And they've posted certainly a number of UFO articles over the last couple of years or so, and a number of them have been written by somebody named M.J. Banias. Now, last week, or within the last week or so, an article was posted by Banias that basically highlighted the work of Damon Steer of the Conway Daily Sun. Now, the Conway Sun is a New Hampshire-based newspaper that obviously, with the New Hampshire primary happening just recently, has had the Democratic candidates come through town. And what Damon invariably does is when he gets the opportunity to ask each of the candidates about the UFO question, he gets that in there. And lots of them have answered in varying degrees. Amy Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders, Deval Patrick, Tulsi Gabbard, and there have been a couple others. So basically, Banias's article got a little bit of comment from Damon, and also was compiled the responses that he got. So this was an article that I did see, but I have to admit that I originally did not read through it all that much, because basically I have access to Damon's articles where he actually posts the full video of the conversation with these various presidential candidates, and it has a timestamped, hey, the UFO question comes in here. So I've been able to follow that as they've come out, and then post them over at my group so people can take a look and see what these different Democrat candidates think about the UFO question. So Damon's doing great work, and Banias basically got his comment and compiled some of the responses that Damon got together. And okay, that article got posted at my group. I didn't read through that article terribly carefully for a real specific reason. And again, as I stated earlier, it's because I saw it as it was coming out, so there was no reason for me to follow up with it more carefully. However, someone noticed, and Chant, you might be able to add some feedback on this. Somebody noticed and took great offense to a particular paragraph that was inserted really for no apparent reason. It was completely off topic to the rest of the article, but this was inserted by Banias.
Yeah, I can read that paragraph.
Okay, you want to go ahead and read that while more mainstream? Okay, go ahead and read that. Yeah.
Okay, so at the bottom of this article, very nearly, it says, while more mainstream coverage of UFOs continues to bombard the internet and cable news channels, the UFO community is far from a unified voting bloc. No data exists which clearly indicates which side of the aisle UFO people tend to fall on. That being said, politics is undoubtedly baked into many ufology circles, and many right-wing conspiracists who are into both UFOs and QAnon deem President Donald Trump to be some sort of messianic figure ready to save America from various secret evil cabals. Combine that with weird conspiracies concerning ancient alien astronauts and alternative history, which is often the fare of neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups, and the seedy underbelly of some UFO groups begin to indicate a clear political and often racial position.
Now, what is that doing in this article? You know, you should be spotlighting the work of a great journalist like Damon Steer, and then you stick something like that in there. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. He provides some links to some other articles and websites that supposedly support his position. They really don't. He's had this agenda, and he's had this agenda for a while. His now defunct podcast, he had some poet friend of his where the focus was of conversation was on this on the racism of the UFO community, and it's absolute garbage. It's a very irresponsible thing to write, and really not true. And what I'll do is I'll try to explain why I think it is. First of all, UFOs are out there. So yeah, a lot of different people can latch onto it. Some of them will be right-wing conspiracists, some of them will be left-wing, some of them will be all types. But what he is really attempting to do here is paint the entire community with this broad brush of racism, which is absolutely preposterous. Now, not surprisingly, he was called on this, and here was his response. Do you want to mention the name of the friend of yours who saw this and was critical of it?
Well, all I can say is the individual that pointed out this article in a group said this: I'm more disgusted at the biased nonsense part about ancient astronaut and alternative history being a racist concept. Want to read bad biased journalism? Then go ahead and click that link. Biased nonsense, personally, I will not share this for the good of the community and hope others follow suit. Then, there's a series of comments here that were asking MJ to please answer to a few comments. And one is this. I just want to go ahead and read it. And that is, can you address in this paragraph your article? And they're asking MJ Bonuses. Combine that with weird conspiracies concerning ancient aliens, astronauts, and alternative history, which is often the fare of neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups, and the seedy underbelly of some UFO groups begin to indicate a clear political and often racial position. And then the question is this: why is the ancient aliens topic considered weird and racist? One of those topics are traditionally covered in many UFO-related groups without a single racist overtone. One of these topics can include the idea of some racism, Nazi Bell, UFO/Vril Society idea hoaxes, possibly. It really depends on how some folks represent that unproven history. But the AA topic, ancient alien topic, in a broad sense does not represent racism. It looks like you focused in on an aspect of these topics and decided to cherry pick an aspect of them that could indeed be racist, which was manufactured by people who have nefarious intent. By and large, most folks in the UFO community who ascribe to ancient alien astronauts are not espousing racist propaganda. To openly call ancient alien astronauts theorists racist is not fair to those folks who are absolutely not racist nor have ill will towards others.
Yeah, and his initial response is plenty of work has been done concerning this. It is no secret, as per the study done by Dr. Brenda Densler, that the UFO community does have political bias. I've never seen any evidence. If anything, I would say it probably leans a little bit left towards the Democratic side. And that's just based on no research whatsoever, but basically just my impressions of talking to and dealing with people in the UFO community over a number of years, and a lot of some of them do lean way right, some of them do lean way left. There's no question about that. But I would say if there's any political bias, it would be a little bit to the left. So I don't know this Dr. Brenda Densler's research, but I would certainly like to see a little bit more about this claim of political bias and a tendency to be populated by middle-aged white males. Well, gee, you don't need to be an academic and to have done too much research to recognize that, it is populated by middle-aged white males to a very large extent. And all you really need to do is anybody who owns their own Facebook group or has their own YouTube channel can take a look and see for themselves. Here's the gender and age breakdown of my Facebook group with 75,000 members. Thank you very much. You see, obviously, 75% male, 24% female. Very few under the age of 24. Most of them are in that 25 to looks like roughly 64 age group. No question about it. There's no breakdown here as far as race or ethnicity, but you just look at the profile pictures. You can see, most of the people who are into UFOs are white. I mean, people get into what they get into, and maybe I'm coming from this from kind of an odd perspective, in that I'm an older white male too. I didn't get into UFOs until seriously, like proactively and generating material on my own. I didn't get into it until I was almost 50 years old. People get into what they get into. UFOs, you're either into it or you're not. It's a very, very small subculture when you get right down to it. And so what? The fact that it's overwhelmingly white male interest in the field, well, people get into what they get into. We're not talking about civil rights here. We're not talking about issues of economic fairness. We're talking about what people choose to do with their own time. And the last time I checked, maybe it's different up in Canada, the last time I checked, the United States is a free country, and with your free time, you can do with it whatever you please. And if minorities tend not to, and women tend not to choose to get into the field, that's their right.
Okay,
it's as simple as that, and it doesn't mean that the white males who dominate the field, and I'm not going to argue that that's not the case. That pretty obviously is the case. Are keeping these minorities and women out.
Okay, so I have to disagree with you here.
Okay.
Now I'll tell you why. There are 7.7 billion people on this planet. There's no way a single academic or other kind of study can encompass or represent the UFO community in its entirety and outside of it regarding the folks who follow faithfully the UFO topic. Now, we might be able to glean data regarding kinds of demographics that follow the UFO topic in Facebook groups, as you mentioned. However, 7.7 billion people are not members of Facebook, and they're not all joined into the UFO groups either. Now, some of these folks read articles on the UFO topic by looking over UFO-related posts from public Facebook groups or other social media. In other words, they are another demographic of folks who are not counted in these studies done by academics and scholars or statisticians who are part of the larger UFO community, but just outside of it in a peripheral manner. The other thing I want to mention is the overlooked part about all of this is that women are considered second-class citizens in many of the under 200 countries on this planet. I would like to know how in the hell these women who are treated like second-class citizens are supposed to have the same kind of rights as men do, or boys for that matter, to jump on the net and get involved in an active way, finding out more or becoming an activist in the UFO-related topic. That's another part of this spectrum of data that is openly being ignored, while other people, like this individual here, are leaning on statistics that, in all actuality, might represent a very narrow aspect of society. One example is, I believe Dr. Brenda Densler may have used a statistic regarding the U.S. and possibly Canada at the same time. Now, that does not cover the other under 200 countries in the world. Now, she may have used other studies, not just that one that I mentioned here. There is one problem with it. We do not have access to those studies, polls, research that was done from her book, because we don't have that book. You have to have $35 to buy the cloth copy and $25 for the book, and I cannot find any excerpts that reveal all the studies she relied upon, or did for that matter on her own, in that book. So there's an awful lot of things that I have at issue regarding what was said in that article. And I would also like to say that what MJ did was he misused statistics in the sense that he talked about the entire UFO community while relying on Dr. Brenda Densler's some of her data. And you cannot paint the entire UFO community based on very narrow statistics. It's just not fair to us, and it's a misuse of statistics, which asserts a falsehood.
Yeah, and if you follow his lack of logic, okay, some of his art, he linked to an article in Newsweek that came out a while back about John Ventry, and who is, he's a racist. There's no doubt. I'm not going to argue that for you. John Ventry is a racist. There's no question about it. So I'm not going to argue that point. But that's one guy who's no longer associated with MUFON, and maybe they should have gotten handled that differently. No question, they should have handled that differently and moved him along a little bit more expeditiously than they did. But that's one guy. Okay, here's another one guy, Stan Romanek, who was convicted of possession of child pornography. Does that mean that the UFO community supports child pornography and thinks it's okay? I don't think so. This is the kind of logic that Banias is using. And of course, he turned tail and ran after I asked him these questions. If the field is so racist, how do you explain the robust Hispanic contributions to the field? He had no answer. I don't think there is an explanation. There's no doubt that the black involvement in the UFO field trails the general population, at least here in the States, by quite some number. I don't have to see real hard numbers on that. There's no question about it. But again, people are free to do with their free time whatever they choose. It's a free country. And if they choose not to get involved in UFOs, then so be it. I don't think it's because people are standing at the door saying, no blacks allowed or no women allowed. People are allowed in. There's no question about that in my mind. As your friend Tom Bowden, who we had here on the show
Right.
a couple weeks
Bowden.
back, said it's an open tent. We have an open tent. They got rid of the guy Ventry,
Right.
who was the racist. And another thing about the ancient astronaut theory, ancient alien theory. If AA theory is so inherently racist, how do you explain those who purport that every major technical advance since the late 1940s was the result of found ET tech? Who's that racist against? Who's been responsible for most of the major technical advances over the last 75 years or so? It's
Right.
not women and minorities. I mean, that's just the way it is. It's been largely older white males. That's just the way it goes. I mean, I would love to see
So
the sciences get more diverse, and I love seeing space science articles where you see, women quoted, and they're involved directly in the research and quoting from their papers, and I think it's fantastic. I think every field. I'm a big fan of diversity. I think that everything should be more diverse on the one hand, but on the other hand, again, people are into what they're into, and if they chose not to follow this, if they choose not to get interested, well, that's their right too.
I think using a very narrow statistic that might be U.S. and or Canada based, and then using it to represent the entire UFO community is unfair. And I wanted to mention that studies have not been able to do statistics. These kind of studies have not represented statistics of folks from other countries that have the biggest populations, like China or India, for example. People from all over the world follow the UFO phenomenon topic and never once engage in racist UFO-related literature. So to say, for the sake of example, middle-aged white males are predominantly what make up the UFO community cannot be said with total accuracy, because these studies did not do a census in the nearly 200 countries on the planet. As a result, statistics like these get thrown around in an authoritative manner, like MJ did there when he said what he did, thus propagating the falsehood. Middle-aged white males are only involved, this is an example we're using here to explain a point, in the topic of ufology. And when stats like this are thrown around that cannot possibly be proven as fact, that creates a whole new level of bias towards a group of people who do not represent the UFO community as a whole, and oddly enough, can create a whole new level of racism, which is the very thing he's claiming is falsely happening. Now, I wanted to read a comment here that one person said, and that was, with all due respect, MJ, Banyas, you are wrong. The fact we are having this discussion is because of the race card and political card unjustly written in the article.
You're breaking up again, Chant. Sorry about that. Chant,
are honest individuals looking.
You're breaking up, so let me jump in here and make a little comment, and then hopefully that problem has solved itself. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
It's okay. I can finish it. The vast majority of ufologists are honest individuals looking for answers and publishing information and theories. The way the words were written in this article would lead the average person to believe the majority of ufology is made up of racist, politically minded wackos with ties to neo-Nazi white supremacist groups, which is far from the truth. If there is a group as described in this article, it is so small that it is a moot point and not worth one's time to discuss. It's more like a mouse in the room.
Exactly.
I see a different agenda in this article targeting honest men and women who have worked very hard in the world of ufology. As far as I'm concerned, what was stated in this article is propaganda.
And and on top of all that, it had no place in what was otherwise, a decent compendium of the work of a very fine journalist. It was just completely off topic and irresponsible. Banias, I know, has stated publicly, he did have a podcast at one point. He gave up on it because, by his own admission, he wasn't very good at it. You might want to consider the same in terms of writing about UFOs. Now, let me make another point about communities in general and demographics hoax and all that. I mean, I do know a little bit about it from work experience and, crunching numbers and all that. No niche interest. I don't care whether it's UFOs or NASCAR or needlepoint or birding or photography or whatever the case may be. No specific demographic in that particular interest niche is going to accurately mirror the general population. It's just never going to happen. It never has happened. It never will happen. There are always going to be discrepancies. Some might lean a little bit more female, some a little bit more male, some a little bit more white, some a little bit more Hispanic, some a little bit more black, whatever the case may be. So you're always going to have those demographic discrepancies between a niche population and a broader general population. So that's a point that I want to make. And also, again, I'll remake the point that I made earlier that just because, at least within the states, I do accept that. At least within the United States, it leans male, it leans white, it leans older. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's racist. Yeah, I'm sure that there are also more racists in the field than John Ventry. He's not the only one, I'm sure of that. But by and large, I would say that the folks in the UFO field are generally pretty good folks. They whatever their politics might be, they're generally pretty decent folks. There are some notable exceptions, and Ventry's not the only one, even if the issues that they have are not necessarily racist in nature. They've got other issues as well, just in terms of integrity and all that. But
there is one other issue with what MJ said. I would like to mention it. And this is something that he wrote. He said, I think it's an important aspect in our continuous journey to understand the UFO phenomenon. Knowledge is predominantly cultural. It builds upon history and aspects of our past. So if aspects of our community's discourse stems from racist ideologies and texts, of course, that will follow us. It isn't until we address those issues and deal with our collective ghosts that we begin to address the broader question, are we alone? Now, I do have a comment that I wanted to make about that, and that is this. What do you think folks in the UFO community have been doing? Wearing white pointy hats and going to meetings to go act racist? The worldwide UFO community is focused on finding out more on the are we alone topic than ever before. Despite this, you still accuse us of not addressing that topic. You do not speak for the UFO community, nor do you represent the current reality of what's going on either. There are tons of dedicated folks from all different backgrounds in the UFO community who work very hard to find out more about the UFO topic on a regular. Your skewed perspectives do them a grave injustice. These dedicated folks are amateur astronomers, people with degrees, academic types, scholars, and everyone in between. Ufology has room for everyone. These dedicated folks are looking for more evidence or that elusive thing called proof of ET civilizations and more, just like various UFO-related worldwide organizations are, or the SCU, which is the Scientific Coalition for UAPs, or any other organizations or individuals dedicated to the UFO phenomenon topic. You inserted us into a fake drama we do not have roles in, nor do we deserve either. If we were to follow your character assassination of us, the entire worldwide UFO community are all racist, middle-aged white guys up to no good, and that is not true nor correct, nor is it fair to use to us as a UFO community.
Read that last quote from him again, if you don't mind, because I want to tear into it too.
Sure. Let me just go ahead and go up to it. I'll just start from the beginning where he started. It's just a very small paragraph.
And I might interrupt you, and I'll get going. It'll be enough to get me going.
Plenty of work. So this is MJ Banyas speaking about his article.
Yes.
And he was addressing the part that folks brought to his attention regarding the racist part and more. And he says, work has been done concerning this. It's no secret, as per the study done by Dr. Brenda Densler, that the UFO community does have political bias.
No, I'm sorry.
I'm getting to it.
Okay.
I'm leading up to it. have political bias and a tendency to be populated by middle-aged white males. It's interesting from a gender perspective that the vast majority of UFO researchers and experts, in quotes, are male as well. I think it's an important aspect in our continuous journey to understand the UFO phenomenon. Knowledge is predominantly cultural. It builds upon history and aspects of our past. So if aspects of our community's discourse stems from racist ideologies and texts, of course that will follow us. It isn't until we address those issues and deal with our collective ghosts that we can begin to address the broader question, are we alone?
What a hot, steaming pile of bullshit.
I know.
And I'm not surprised that he ran away from my very simple questions that basically deflate all of his stupid arguments. Again, ancient alien theory is racist because, dark-skinned people couldn't have built those pyramids and megalithic structures on their own without the help of aliens. But again, it is pervasive thinking in the field, okay? And AA theory does not dominate the field. Granted, the Ancient Alien show has been running for years and gets great ratings because it's a wildly, ridiculously entertaining show. And the people who are a part of it are incredibly, and I mean incredibly, enthusiastic about their subject. It's not all dark and fear porn, and that's a big part of the reason why it's so successful in my view. But again, if it's so racist, there's also a school of thought within the field, and I'll make this point again, and I'll be ready to wrap up after this, that every major technical advance since the late 1940s was the result of found ET tech. There are people in this field, and I might agree with some of it. I'd certainly qualify the majority of it, and there's some of it's just completely over the top, but their answer to everything is aliens. Whether it's back during the days of the ancient pyramids, or it's right up to today, talking about transistors or lasers or anything like that. Every answer is aliens.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's very true. So I did want to address something that's very important, and that is M.J. Banya said, knowledge is predominantly cultural. So this is what I had to say.
And what does that even mean?
Right.
It's just him being his usual gas bag self. What does it even mean? It means nothing. Knowledge is cultural.
That statement is not true in its entirety. Let me explain why. The kind of knowledge that MJ is talking about is cultural knowledge, which is different than the word knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, let me jump in here and make a point. There's a lot of scientific cross-cultural knowledge. Math is math, no matter where you go.
Exactly.
Math is math. Science is science. Doesn't matter where you go.
Right. So there are several definitions of knowledge, and he cited one of them, and the explanation for it does not accurately portray the UFO community by any stretch of the imagination. He also states, if aspects of our community's discourse stems from racist ideologies and texts,
which it doesn't,
of course that will follow us. And so what I have to say to that is the worldwide UFO community does not reflect the kind of discourse he's espousing here. At times, he's lumping in the entire UFO community under the umbrella of old stereotypes and then leaving the UFO community with the short end of the stick.
Yeah.
This is
and maybe his thinking is unduly affected by the wine and cheese culture he hangs around in, where everything is racist and all of their ideas are brilliant and backed up by research, shoddy research, I might add.
Well, what he's doing is
research.
What he said, I believe, is a form of sabotage through the use of old stereotypes that do not currently apply to us, nor are they relevant to the worldwide UFO community. Again, they do not currently apply. Why? Because in the under 200 countries, there has not been any studies done by any academics or any organization that I'm aware of regarding the kinds of things that he is claiming to be true in a broad sense.
All right, we spent a half hour on this. Do you have
right.
anything? We spent more on this than we did on our other topics. But
it is important to defend the UFO community. To call the UFO community racist in the manner that he did, regarding what we read that he wrote
not just on a blog, but in a article on a mainstream website.
Right. it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, within the context of an article, that these comments had absolutely no place. They were non sequiturs within the context of the larger argument, the larger article, I should say. So, all right, I'm exhausted by this. Chant, it's been an ugly hour and a half, roughly, that we've been going through a lot of the crap that's come down. Hopefully, we're going to have some good stuff, some positive stuff about UFOs, about the phenomenon, and not how people go about the phenomenon. Some of whom really, ought to find something different to do with their free time. You got anything else to close this up?
I just think it's important for people to understand that statistics can be used in a misleading fashion and can manipulate people into thinking something other than what the data may reveal. And it's important that people also understand that overgeneralizations can occur with statistics in a biased manner. So, and this is what I think happens a lot. Folks who call themselves journalists or people who write articles will write this kind of crap all the time, even though it's damaging to certain communities, and then go on to the next article, I say that in quotes, without thinking they'll be called out on it. And maybe they don't care. But you know what? It's important to understand that if you're going to write something, at least write something that can be verified as true.
I have no doubt that he believes it. And, to me, that's the problem with this guy. So, this is we've had this show almost 2 years. I think this is the first time his name has come up, and hopefully it's the last. So, yeah, I'm ready to call it a night. What do you think, Chant?
Yeah, we do have a great show that's going to go on this Sunday. I'll go ahead and we'll go over the guests on Sunday, but I really recommend folks, because legendary people in the realm of ufology that has been involved in the world of ufology for a little over a couple decades. And I know there's a lot of questions about this topic. I can't really say who's going to be on the show, but I can tell you it's going to be about the alien autopsy film. And we're going to have some really interesting folks who are going to attack this topic, and we're going to listen to them go at it regarding this subject.
Sounds like fun. All right, we're out of here. Enjoy your weekend. And thanks for spending your free time. I assume most of our listeners are living in free countries, and obviously you've got the right to do whatever it is you want to do with your free time. And I'm so very, very glad, very glad that you've chosen your free time to spend it listening to us. Thanks a lot. You have a good night, and we'll be seeing you on Sunday. Bye-bye.